Hi, my name is Eli Kranzberg. In this series of videos, you'll learn all about the basics of music theory, rhythm, melody, and harmony. Maybe you've been using a DAW for a while and now want to learn a bit more about the fundamentals of how music is organized. Maybe you're an audio engineer who has been mixing and editing for years and want to sharpen your musical skills. Or maybe you're a singer-songwriter who wants to be able to flesh out arrangements in your sequencer software. Maybe you want to learn how to write or read a lead sheet. Or maybe you just want to revisit a long-forgotten high school music course. Whatever the case, whatever the instrument you play, we're going to cover all the basics from the ground up, and I'll include some fun and useful play-along examples for you to practice with as we go along. Let's start by defining music as organized sound. So as opposed to unorganized sound, which is chaotic and thought of as noise, music can be thought of as an art form whose medium is sound. So let's get a little bit into the math and science behind it before we jump in and start learning notes and scales. All sound is a result of sound waves being generated by vibrations and disturbances of the atmosphere and objects around us. So even my voice now as I'm speaking, I'm pushing air and it's hitting the diaphragm of this microphone, just like when you play a musical instrument, whether you're rubbing a bow against a string or blowing into a mouthpiece or hitting a drum or hitting a pick on a guitar string, certain resonances and vibrations are being generated that move through the air and generate sound waves. Now, these sound waves can be either ordered or chaotic. When they're ordered and periodic, meaning repeating regularly over time, we hear a specific frequency or pitch. So let's define a frequency as the number of occurrences of a repeating event over a specific unit of time. So that's when they're ordered, and when they're chaotic, we just hear them as noise. But when the sound being generated is ordered and organized and repeating and periodic, we measure it by the number of cycles per second. Hertz is the scientific unit for the number of times an event happens per second. It's the measurement we use, and you'll see it abbreviated as Hz. And you'll often find EQ plugins measure frequencies like this in hertz, and they also measure in kilohertz, which refers to thousands of hertz. Human hearing ranges normally from about 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. Let me just quickly open an EQ plugin and show you what this looks like. You've probably seen numbers like this before, 80 hertz, which is really low, 200, 500, 1200, 10,000, and it goes all the way up. And with EQs, you attenuate or boost specific frequencies within this whole range of human hearing. But I digress. Let's go back. Let me show you a little example now. I have a sound wave that's being generated here at 1 kilohertz, which is 1000 hertz. Let me play it for you. And if we zoom in and look at the waveform, you'll see that it's regular and repeating and periodic like this. So this is 1000 cycles per second. And this is a pure sine wave, so it's pure. Now to contrast this, let's look at something that we might determine to be noise, or we might identify as noise. I have the sound of a car passing by. So there's no specific repeating periodic frequencies that are being generated in an ordered way that generates any kind of pitch or tone. So if we look at that in waveform view, you'll see that there's nothing repeating or periodic or repetitive in this shape of the waveform. Let's go to the loud parts here, where we can see the waveform more clearly. And when you zoom right in, you'll see that it's irregular. And with the absence of this repeating cyclical pattern or periodic pattern, we don't hear any kind of specific frequency, and we identify it as noise. Let's continue with our definitions now. Pitch is a musical term that's used, and that means pretty much the same thing as frequency, except it's way less accurate a measurement. Instead of identifying sound by the number of cycles per second on a scale of 20 to 20,000, we name specific values with letters. We call them A or C or B flat, and that refers to a specific frequency or number of cycles per second. Musical instruments generally produce sound waves that are regular and periodic, which we call tones or notes. So basically a note is a very rapid, regular, pulsating, repeating sound wave. The pitch of a note refers to how high or how low it is. Lower pitches have longer wavelengths, and higher pitches have shorter wavelengths. Let me show you. We just looked at that 1 kilohertz sine wave over here. And let's look at the waveform again. And when we zoom in, you see the distance between the cycles. Let's jump now to 500 hertz, which is half of that, and you see that they're wider apart. Let's jump to 80 hertz. Way down, they're much wider apart, and it's much lower pitched or lower frequencies. So there you have an example of the different shapes at the different frequencies. Now, a single musical note is based around a strong fundamental frequency, as we see here. These are all pure tones. But it also contains resonant frequencies, which are called overtones or partials. Now, these overtones or partials make certain relationships between notes stronger than others. Let me give you another example here. Here's 440 hertz, and this is a standard pitch reference used with musical instruments. It refers to an A on a piano above middle C. A440 is a standard tuning notes that orchestral instruments use to tune up with. Let's select that, and we'll listen to it. It's a pure sine wave, and if we zoom in here, we'll see the regular repeating waveform. But now let's look at that same pitch played by a piano sound. There's a piano sound, and when we look at that, you'll see it's a regular repeating form, but there's all kinds of subtle variations and nuances in it. That's what gives it the characteristic of the sound of the piano. But there are also certain resonant frequencies, overtones, and partials that make other notes in relation to this one stronger than certain other ones. Let me show you what I mean. Here I'm going to choose a piano sound. There's that A, and I can play an octave higher another A, which is another note, but it's very strongly related. It's the same note an octave higher, but it's got strong overtones and partials, which make them closely related. These overtones and partials are always present, and they dictate how closely or distantly related certain notes are to others. Like, for example, this interval is a lot more closely related than, let's say, this one. But we're going to get into all that in subsequent videos. In traditional music notation, these notes are identified by their position on a musical staff or musical stave. So when you look at a score editor in modern music software, you can see that, for example, here's that A note that we've been listening to, and it's positioned on a staff by this second space on this stave. And the higher it is on the stave, the higher the pitch, the lower it is, the lower the pitch. We're going to get into all this stuff. And in addition to traditional notation like this, another more modern way of displaying and illustrating and editing and working with pitches and notes in modern music software are piano grid style editors. They look usually something like this, where you see a piano keyboard on the side and then horizontal beams that refer to the notes, and you can manipulate them that way. But this basically says to me the same thing as this. It's just a different system of representation, just as saying 440 cycles per second or saying A. They're all different means of identifying the same pitch or frequency or tone. So that's a little overview of sound and how tones and pitches and frequencies are generated and how it all works. Stay tuned. We're going to jump in and get started with music theory in the next video.